Rather bizarrely, my dream job is to be either a stand-up comedian or lead singer of a rock band and play in front of huge audiences, but I'm not funny and I can't sing, so pensions and financial education was the next best thing. The great thing about coming on at this time is it's not after lunch, it's before lunch, so hopefully you're still all excited about things that are going to happen. And also, I've been speaking to people and listening to the presentations. Now, I just want to read something out which I think is really apt. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes because I think it's an absolute nightmare, the jobs that you do. So, here's a quote. Some of you may recognise it. There are no knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. Anyone remember who said that? Correct. 2002, Donald Rumsfeld. Now, at the time, it was sort of ridiculed because it sounded like gobbledygook, but actually, if you look at that and think about it, it's exactly what you're faced with. And it's exactly what individuals are faced with when they're looking at their finances. It's not the things they know, they don't know, it's the things that they don't know, they don't know. And that's obviously where we're trying to help, and where some of the speakers have already talked about in you as employers helping employees to actually educate themselves and understand a little bit more about what they're doing. For those of you who were present for Stuart Hopley's section with Scottish Widows, apparently he talks to his family about pensions and tells them what he does. If people ask me what I do for a living outside the industry, I design aeroplane wings. And I once persuaded somebody on a train coming back from Bristol that actually Boeing 737 aeroplane wings were made out of wood to keep the weight down, and she believed me and is probably telling people for the last 10 years that that is exactly what happens. It isn't, apparently. So, moving on to my topic, effectively trying to justify to the board return on investment on financial wellbeing. I think that's impossible. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you find it. It is difficult, and we've already seen that. We've seen some examples in the last session with Monica. I think she mentioned there with London City Airport, some good returns there and some justification on spend. But it is so difficult. We've already looked at what makes up financial wellbeing and the pillars and the links to that. And obviously the financial aspects have a huge impact, and obviously that's what we're going to talk about. I started in the pension industry over 30 years ago, which is quite depressing, and I know you find that hard to believe. But even up to 10 years ago, financial well-being wasn't an expression. Financial education didn't exist. We talked about employee comms and engagement. The pensions industry did some stuff around presentations and booklets and what have you. But the thing has grown massively now, and the choice that you're faced with is absolutely huge. I'm not going to labour on stats. There's a stat there from Neighbour, which we just heard from. But, you know, we all know the issues, the fact that people are being affected. Sorry, did you want to take a photograph of that last one? It's fascinating. It's a page out of our report that we issued in 2017 with help from our PwC colleagues in the States, where this is huge, as you can imagine, and lots of resource and lots of fantastic stats. So we all know there's an issue. You guys know there's an issue. You're probably doing something about it already. We all have heard the stats and all the rest of it. But it's actually putting solutions in place. And working for a large accountancy firm, I'm surrounded by accountants, and quite often you have to justify to your FDs the fact that actually spending some money is good for the organisation. And I think probably too often with financial education as a subject, we're focused on the employee issues and the whole range of things that we can be helping. But actually, that's a bit of a so what, unless you just really are a fantastic paternalistic organisation, which many are, of course. It's actually going to the right-hand side in showing what the employer is going to get out of this. And the hard part is measuring that, of course, because whilst we could have all these stats of high turnover of staff and high absenteeism and all the rest of it, putting a financial wellbeing programme in place might coincide with some improvement, but was that as a direct result? The likelihood is because you've changed your whole emphasis and the whole way in which you're carrying out business and looking after your staff. So there's a number of areas there which employer can justify and is going to hopefully see improvements in. Here's another stat or another set of information which was produced by our colleagues with some input to relevance in the UK. The numbers are irrelevant to some extent. 10,000 employees, 30% of those employees are distracted, might be higher from some of the stats we've seen now. And then when you feed it all the way through to the amount of hours per week that's having an effect on productivity, for a size of company with 10,000 employees, you're looking at lost productivity of over £2 million a year, which is phenomenal, and that's probably on the conservative side. So we know that, we know what the issues are, we know the fact that this is impacting on bottom line. And to be fair, we are dealing with organisations and clients where FDs are beginning to understand that actually if we're looking after our main asset, employees, that will ultimately have an effect on bottom line. But these things will help. The 5 R's, be careful how you say that. Recruitment, retention, recognition, reward and retirement. These are all things I've been talking about, particularly the 4 R's, for probably about 15 years. The 5th R, retirement, is probably easier to measure in some respects. Since abolition of default retirement age, a number of years ago now, obviously we can't just retire somebody off. I saw a great play a couple of years ago with Jim Broadbent in, I think it's called The Street. If you've never seen it, it's really good. And it was basically, he was 65, he'd never taken holiday, he was a transport manager in this company, and basically his boss brought him in and says, you're going on holiday? No, I'm not. Yes, you are. You're going on holiday for 2 weeks because at the end of it, we're going to have your retirement party. I'm not retiring. Yes, you are. You're 65. So I was watching this thinking, well, this is ridiculous with abolition of default retirement age, and then looked at when it was done, it was 2005. There were also smoking indoors as well, which was a giveaway. But the message was through that, and it was a fantastic 90-second spell. He got his financial advisor in, and they were looking through it all, and they said, right, how much have I got? So I said, well, you've got your pot here, you can take 25% as tax-free cash, so you can have £9,000 in your pocket. All right, great. And then you've got, working it out, it was something like £1,800. He said, oh, a month, that'd be okay. He said, no, a year. £1,800 a year. You've got a pot of 30-odd thousand. He said, I've been saving into this pension for 40 years. How come no one's ever told me about it? And then there was a whole event where he tried to electrocute himself to get the death in service for his wife and all the rest of it. But in that 90 seconds, and I've never been able to get the snap, but that really summed up the majority of people. And I've got many, many other anecdotes as well, real-life anecdotes of talking to clients and family members. So retirement is a huge one, and one where probably financial education, financial well-being possibly really started from, with the pensions industry and the providers trying to give more help to get people to plan how much they need to put in and all the rest of it. But actually it's more than that, and a lot of people will rely on different areas for saving. My own brother is an example. 58, I think. A couple of years ago, he was going to be made redundant. He had his DC scheme, and he knew he could do drop down with it, which I thought was a good description, so rather than drawdown. Took his tax-free cash, and then he had a load of other retained benefits where he'd got a lovely spreadsheet, asking them all the questions. He said, this one matures at 65, this one matures at 67. I then took a sharp intake of breath, gave him some quick guidance on pensions freedom, and then he went off and did something completely different, and took a year off, working part-time, and has taken income from anything other than something that says pension on it. So he thought he was going to have to get another full-time job until all his pensions matured. Ultimately he hasn't, and he's been able to take his foot off the gas and semi-retire at 58, which he never thought he would. Recruitment, retention, I think are huge issues with anything to do with benefits and financial help to individuals. We were working with a client last year, and they had an issue with one location they identified where the participation in the pension scheme was a lot lower, contributions were a lot lower. They had no idea why. It was just an anomaly. We'd looked at the stats, we'd looked at the data, and this one location was just lower than everyone else, and no logic to it. They discovered that actually the onboarding process was a lot worse than anywhere else. So when they joined, they were just given a pack. There you are. That's the pension. Those are the benefits. It was a photocopy of a photocopy, and they weren't really looked after. So by just changing and increasing that a little bit, there was a better engagement, the take-up was better, contribution levels were better. So I think it was mentioned before, we can measure things such as number of hits on websites, where people's contributions might increase, where where there's active choosing of funds in DC. So there's some easy wins there. Whether we can demonstrate or justify that actually we've increased productivity by putting financial wellbeing plan in place, it's very difficult to prove, but I think there's enough evidence and enough anecdotal evidence from everyone that's talked as well that actually, why wouldn't this be an obvious solution? You know, we can show that we can earn money by spending money. And I think it was a really interesting point that Monica made, that this isn't a single journey. And one of my expressions is that you never educate somebody once. So this isn't just about rolling out one solution to staff, because you're going to get new staff joining anyway, but actually having something that is relevant and ongoing, and is relevant to the workforce. And I'm going to come on to that in a bit more detail. Other things which can be very, very specific, high earners. We've talked about in a previous session, I can't remember which one it was, I sat in on now, about tapered annual allowance. You know, we're doing a lot of work around helping employees understand what that means, because ultimately that can be a huge stress. I was talking to two senior people of a company this week that suddenly been hit with a huge annual allowance tax bill that they had no idea about, and that caused them a hell of a lot of stress, a hell of a lot of grief. So actually trying to get in and be preventative obviously helps with making sure that we don't have a lot of these nasty stats at some point. So it's preventative rather than cure, but an absolute essential. Oops. So with all those, there's a cost, negative cost somewhere. Even with recruitment, even if it's just the case of actually promoting your existing benefits better, you know, it might not be changing anything, but it's actually making sure that people understand what the benefits package is. And in some industries, that could be absolutely critical. The hourly rate might be exactly the same, but having all these extra benefits, and again, I think it's Monica that said this, was regarding the view that financial education, a financial wellbeing program actually is viewed as a benefit in itself by employees, because whilst it's not a product, it's not necessarily something that's it might be holistic, they do value that input because it can get rid of a lot of the worries. Some of the worries are real. You know, if someone's got £200,000 worth of gambling debt, that's real. But actually some of this, like my brother's example, he was probably worried the fact that he might have to work until he was 67. Actually he didn't. He was in a good position, but it got rid of that worry from him. Trying to second guess what our employees want is wrong. I've been involved in the industry for a long time, as I said, and specifically around sort of financial education the last few years. And I think it's important to actually understand your workforce. We're doing a lot of work with clients where we're analysing what their workforce is, what it looks like, based on, in this example, a tool that we use on postcodes, which you can find a hell of a lot of information from postcodes. And with a large employer, it makes even more sense, but it basically splits people into, I think there's about 16 different categories. So looking at what their financial position is, from debt, from savings, from ability to retirement incomes, right across the piece. And then being able to actually look at the different groups of people by age, by salary, by gender, by region, and finding out what the actual workforce looks like. So instead of just rolling out career stage financial education or solutions which may or not be appropriate, actually understanding what the workforce is. It might be one location, it's a completely different scenario to another. So actually starting way, way back and saying, right, what's the objectives here? What we're trying to do? How we're trying to help people? And more importantly, from an employer point of view, what is it we're trying to do? You know, are we just trying to be fluffy and nice and paternalistic, or are we actually trying to change some of these numbers and save some money, increase productivity? But without understanding what our employees look like, that's very difficult. Great example recently, we were working with a client looking at benchmarking and looking at DC contribution rates. We used this model with them, and the result was completely different to what they thought they were going to be doing, primarily because they didn't really understand what their workforce was. So by doing that and identifying where they sat, what propensity for saving they had, what debt they had, completely changed the structure of what the pension contributions were going to be going forward. So it wasn't just about financial education, but it was understanding the workforce better and looking at what their objectives were as a company. Going back to Donald's quote, there's a myriad of options you've got, obviously, and we've seen a lot of those today. So pension providers were probably the first to really get involved in this, as we talked about. We've now got all sorts of other solutions as well. And if you've all got budgets of over £1 million to spend on financial education, then you can probably use all these and have an absolute fantastic solution put in place for everyone, and all your employees might get one-to-one advice as well. However, that's unlikely, so trying to understand which is the best solution, what are the best solutions. You know, I think it's a question of going back to basics and understanding workforce, understanding what the employer objective is, and actually not just having a cross-section of providing the same solutions for everyone. It may well be that one group of employees you want to do different to another, or nothing at all in some cases. So, just winding up, going back to that, you know, there is a cost, there is lost productivity. I think we can justify it if we take bite-sized chunks of actions to show where, and again, Monica's section with Angling Water was a good example where there was a pilot, it worked well, might not have done, they might have changed it. You know, let's do bite-sized chunks and try and get some engagement and be able to justify, particularly if there is a kickback from finance, what's the easiest way of showing that we can actually make a difference. And I think I'm probably finishing within 1 or 2 minutes of my designated 20 minutes, which is remarkable because I've not rehearsed this, as you can guess. So with the 2 minutes left, I'll now either tell some jokes or sing a song, whichever you'd prefer. Or you can just ask me questions.